So the final shape is coming out in a few months, and of course, I'm pretty interested to see how Bungie closes this 10-year journey that we've been on. But I think the more interesting conversation is actually around what we expect to see in the months after the release. I have these conversations with content creator friends all the time, and I decided to finally record one to share with you guys. So here's a talk with my buddies Shadow, Destiny, and Castle Content where we discuss the future of Destiny and what we think the game needs to do to have long-term success after the final shape releases and that hype window cools off. I hope you really enjoy it. So we have Final Shape coming up in a short period of time here, and one of the conversations that happens with all of my creator friends inevitably is not so much about how good the Final Shape will be, because I think we're all hoping at least that it will be a banger and it'll bring back a lot of the community and get people pumped about the game temporarily. But I think the more interesting conversation for me is, what does the post Final Shape world look like, and what would we like to see as players to keep us personally invested, and also our communities and just people that are kind of on the fence about what does Destiny look like after this 10-year mark is sort of over. So there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about this. I know we're all kind of PvP focused players at heart, but we all each have experimented quite a bit with different PvE sides of the game more recently, for some of us, Castle. And so I guess I wanted to ask it in this way. What do you think as a player will keep you wanting to play the game for the next 2 years after Final Shape, let's say? And Shadow, I'll start with you.
So I think the game really needs to go through some big innovations. It's been a really long time since we've had something that felt like a huge monumental shift in the game and the game systems. Like Forsaken, it brought dungeons and Gambit and all these new fundamental changes to the way that weapons work and all that. And we haven't seen changes really on that scale in a long time. Also, I think that inevitably we're going to lose some people in Final Shape. So we also need to bring in some new people. And the new player experience could use some improvements for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. What about you, Castle?
Yeah, I think it boils down to three things, which pretty much echo what Shadow said. I think number one, people need to know that there is a future after Final Shape. I know that we have episodes coming, but I think that when people know that okay, this is the end of a saga, but actually there's all this other stuff and reason for me to invest my time during the Final Shape, then that'll help people kind of stick around. I think number two is exactly what Shadow said, new players. I think that ultimately people are going to leave regardless. So, Bungie just has to figure out, how do we get new players who start in Final Shape, or maybe who played very rarely in the past but came back for Final Shape? How do we get them to stay for sure? Because they're not necessarily the vets who have been playing for 8 years now. And then I think number three, again, kind of echoing what Shadow said, is it really does need a fundamental shift. So an example of that is I took a break from Destiny, but the Go Fast update had me really, really excited to come back to Destiny at some point. And then we had the light subclasses 3.0. Was that what it was called? Yeah. Then we had the subclasses 3.0, right? So we kind of were able to get this new type of subclass in Stasis. And, even though that had a lot of impacts on PvP, it was at least a new system. What are aspects and fragments? And then all of a sudden we had the time, an entire year of going through okay, Void 3.0, okay, Arc, Solar, all of these major changes. But it's been a while. So they're going to need something like that as well, I think.
Yeah, there's one thing that always kind of sticks with me when I think about investment into a game like this. And I think a big part of it is having faith that the time you spend in it will, when it's a live service type game like this specifically, is that when you put hours into the game, it's sort of you're accumulating towards something. I think that's a core part of any of these MMO style games, where the time that you put into building out your character will have some potential future payoff. I mean, that's sort of the whole motivation behind a lot of Destiny, right? It's you grind out these guns in modes, and sometimes maybe, if you're being honest, doing the actual activity itself you're not having that much fun doing, but you're grinding out trials or comp or something where it's frustrating, but you want this particular gun because it's going to be maybe helpful for your account in the future, and that's a big thing. But when people don't have faith that like the future is going to be like worth investing in, I think that's a huge thing that Bungie needs to figure out, to to make people feel like after the final shape, it's still worth them sticking around and like feeling like that investment into their time is actually worth doing.
I completely agree. And I think this actually reminds me a lot of what happened at the end of Destiny 1, because Destiny 1 was actually left in a pretty good place at the end, but people weren't playing it because they knew it doesn't matter because everything's getting deleted in Destiny 2. Nothing carries over from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2. So there was no reason to invest in improving your account because it's just going away in a few months anyway. And I think we're in an oddly similar situation right now, because even though we don't know any plans about a Destiny 3 or something that would cause our stuff to get deleted, we also just know basically nothing about the future. And the fact that the game could be unrecognizable in literally 1 year's time is something that's really scary for players and especially for creators, because we just don't know what's happening. There is no roadmap, there is no promise of future expansions, there's no promise of even future raids. Like I don't know. The future is just incredibly unknown, and it's hard to feel really invested in the game when we know so little about its future.
Yep, absolutely. One of the things that I find interesting is that certain games, like if you look at, I don't know, a game like Counter-Strike or League of Legends or any of these games that are they're more about like your own personal skill growth and like seeing that over time. Destiny, of course, has some components of that. And I think that's most experienced in, I'd say PvP is probably like the most direct way that shows up. I think also, of course, in like, completing certain triumphs, like beating raids flawlessly or like under certain challenging conditions that also exist. But like the thing about PvP is it has this like, evergreen dynamic nature to it, where it's like, your skill can always continuously improve until you're the best player in the game. And you can measure how good you are by, can you beat other players? So there's like a constantly evolving like measuring stick to kind of test your own abilities. And I think, games like the ones I mentioned that have been around for a long time and have had this player base that it's like the community itself kind of keeps itself going. I would love to see Destiny continue to invest more into building out that mentality of players. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift back towards interest in them developing the PvP scene, which I wonder from a sort of like strategy component if they're kind of feeling the same way, where it's like, that is, if you look back in the darker times of Destiny 1, when there wasn't much going on with PvE at all, like there is no new raids coming out for long periods of time. We didn't really have a seasonal model back then in early Destiny 1. It was like these long content droughts, but they did something amazingly smart, which is they created the Trials of Osiris era, which kept people invested in the game week after week, both on social media, like on Twitch and YouTube and whatever, but also just as players, people wanting to log on each week and play the game just to get the rewards and even just climb, the external leaderboards. Like there is the websites that you could track your own progress and stuff like that. So I think it's interesting to watch them starting to do more of that again after kind of ignoring PvP for like 2 years now.
Yep. I think this also kind of relates back into my point of earlier, where there hasn't been a lot of new systems. Like Trials came out in 2015, like Iron Banner came out in 2014. Like when's the next Trials? When's the next Iron Banner? When's the next like evolution of these activities? I think that would really bring some excitement back into the game if there was a new activity like this that people could get super excited about. Because I mean, Trials is great, but after 9 years of Trials, it just doesn't hit the same as, say, if they invented some brand new game mode tomorrow. Like it would just be so much more exciting because it's fresh and new,
Yeah, I've been saying that for ages. Even when they first brought Trials back, like I know that D2 launched with Trials of the Nine, but the community was really hyped about Trials of Osiris coming back, and I felt like this guy in the corner who was kind of looking around like, wait, why are we excited? Like we already had this era. Why isn't it a fresh, brand new game mode? Not Trials of the Nine. That was barely different. Like, why isn't there just a completely different new something else that we should just be even more excited. That's even more fun. Like, I don't know, it felt so weird. And like you said, they just haven't come out with something new since then. I have to say, what I'm curious about, or what I think of sometimes, is like, they really did try with Gambit. It was this, I don't want to say the effort was there, but like they tried and they were like, okay, let's think of a brand new thing. And they came up with Gambit. And on paper, it's like amazing. This wasn't in D1. This is a brand new thing. It incorporates PvE and PvP. Like, it should have been incredible. And then it just flopped. And I feel like what happened is the motivation loss from that game mode, quote unquote, flopping, killed their, it killed their drive to try again, which is sad because, maybe they would, if they just tried again, the next time it would have popped off. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's too bad, but you're absolutely right, Shadow. Like, we just need a new thing. And it's funny because the community isn't even asking for that right now. Like, I think that is what's needed, but the community is just asking for, like, capture the flag, like King of the Hill, like even just game mode changes for PvP, which I wouldn't consider a brand new groundbreaking thing like Trials of Osiris, but it's like, at least that'd be a step in the right direction. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that'd be incredible. If they had a new Trials of Osiris type thing that's completely different, you never know what it could do. It completely hooked people in D1.
Well, I think one of the best equivalent things, speaking of Gambit, is actually, I guess, introduced in a somewhat similar time frame, but the dungeons that got introduced
totally
with Forsaken, right? And that started, I mean, dungeons were not a thing that existed in Destiny 1, and they were not in the year 1 of Destiny 2 either. And then Bungie introduced them, and that became like a core part of PvE. And now it's like players really look forward to each new dungeon almost as much as raids, maybe even more so for some players who don't do as much of like the group stuff. And so I feel like that's a really great example of something that they tried that was new and it worked out exceptionally well. And I hope that they continue to try new things like that. I'm sure it's very expensive from a development standpoint, but I think you're right. It's at a certain point, like the game needs to continuously evolve or it just gets really stale. And, you're just, and especially like we talked about, if you don't have that kind of feeling that the game's going to like be worth investing in the future, it's like you really need to start creating some new systems that get people to have that faith in it.
Right? Yeah, I agree. It's like you either do what it takes. Like you said, it's really expensive and difficult to do, but you either do it or you end it. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, why hang on to a game if you're not going to continue evolving it? I understand it brings in money, so okay, fine. There's that argument, but like, yeah, I don't know. You either advance it or you end it and move on, which is what, D1 to D2. They could have either kept evolving D1 or end it and start D2. And I'm not even saying they have to start D3. It's just like we can't sit in limbo forever. It kind of all comes back to like doing new things, because it's like the 17th raid is just not as exciting as the fourth raid. I mean, it can come close maybe. Like, I know the last raid everyone got really excited and it was awesome. So like clearly there's still an excitement level. But do you know what I mean? Like, at what point are they like, hey, sweet, we have 17 raids, and like the whole idea of replayability, I just feel like it's impossible. Like, it feels like it's so difficult to get people to care about a raid from 2018 for some reason. And if there is a way, like, I personally do not know the solution.
Hey guys, times are kind of tough for Destiny creators right now, and I wanted to thank Manscaped for sponsoring this video. I've been using the Manscaped lawnmower trimmer for probably 2 or 3 years now, and I've been so impressed by this product. It's truly awesome. They just came out with their newest version, the Lawnmower 5.0, and it's even better now. It still has a sleek design similar to the older models, which is really ergonomic and easy to use. But now they've also upgraded their trimmer blades with their new dual skin-safe heads to cut even better. It has longer, wider, and more rounded teeth that really cut through hair easily, which makes it tough on hair but gentle on skin, which is a really important feature of a trimmer that you're using in particular regions, if you know what I mean. The new foil blade is really cool and super easy to pop on, and it helps you get an incredibly close shave even down to skin level. They also upgraded the LED light, making it way brighter, so it's even easier to see what you're doing down there with the 5.0 model. The rechargeable battery lasts for ages, it's USB-C powered, and it even has a travel lock so it won't start trimming by itself when you're not intending to be using it. And maybe the best part, it's still waterproof, which makes it super easy to clean when you're done. If you want to give it a try, and I really recommend that you do, head over to manscaped.com and use code Pattycakes at checkout to get 20% off your order and free international shipping. One of the things I think about is like, what do other games do? Because this, the Destiny, although it was new in terms of like being kind of like the shooter MMO thing, like, other games like World of Warcraft and different MMOs have struggled with similar things, and yet they somehow still retain their players reasonably well. And it's like, I don't know, I guess part of that is that they're constantly willing to make new raids, and that's something that I assume Destiny will just do forever until it's over, right? Because that's like a pretty it's interesting because raids are like fascinating to me because on one hand, like they're one of the most aspirational pieces of content that everyone who's a big super hard Destiny player, like they really look forward to raids. But then as a percentage of the player base, like not that many people even play raids in the first place, right? Like it's a kind of a strange thing where it's like, it's a thing that the most hardcore players tend to look forward to maybe the most. Yet, like, if you look across the entire population, like a lot of people have never even played a single raid.
Right. Or the people who have maybe played it for like a month, like when it came out, and they like worked really hard over 6 weeks to like beat it with their buddies and kind of get the hang of it. But then after that, maybe once they have their weapons, like, 6 weeks out of a 52-week year isn't that large of a percentage of time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard. And I get like, now that there's the red borders and crafting, like there is more drive to play raids more because you quite literally have to in order to get, the required number of red borders and spoils and all of that stuff. If you do want to craft every weapon, you literally do have to play the raid a lot. So there is that they did to try and push people to play raids for longer periods of time over the calendar year. But I think an issue is like, there's so many weapons in the game now that like that one raid weapon, might not actually matter that much because you have like something that's 95% as good from a different raid or maybe from a different activity. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in the sense of like, hey, everyone can hop into an activity and they should have a decent weapon from one of multiple sources in order to complete said activity, So it's it's less gatekeepy, but yeah, it also means people probably don't care as much about getting the loot from a raid or a new thing because
there's just so much loot. Yeah, like this is something I talked about in a video recently. Like there's like 100 hand cannons that are not sunset. Is like, what are the chances of hand cannon number 101 being like the most revolutionary thing ever that people are like actually excited about getting? Like hand cannon number 10, that was probably like a super exciting hand cannon that like people actually cared about and grinded for. But it's like, now that there's just so much loot that is all viable, it's like a new thing is like barely better. And if it is significantly better, then it just gets nerfed. So it's like,
right,
if you're an existing player, yeah, exactly. So if you're an existing player, like there's not really a huge incentive to go get the stuff that's like a 2% upgrade. Like you can beat all the hardest content with like loot that came out 4 years ago. I mean, that's kind of what I do,
Another example of that is like Igneous Hammer. They finally decided like, okay, let's do it. Let's make a 120 that truly is that much better, that is worth the chase. But because, okay, cool. Everyone gets excited about getting Igneous Hammer. Job well done. However, that also means almost every other 120, even the new ones that have come out since then, aren't as appealing. And therefore, it's like, well, there you go. You solved one problem, but you created another. So yeah, it's a really difficult model. And sadly, sunsetting was supposed to be the solution to that problem, right? But it was executed incorrectly. I don't even know how it could be executed correctly. And yeah, here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting because another example I think is Immortal, right? Which is like one of the few guns, like when I think back to the last 2 years of Destiny, the two PvP related guns that I like really changed my habit of like not playing a whole lot to playing a ton of Destiny were Mercurial Overreach from competitive and Immortal when those first came out, because those were both like for me I didn't have a opening shot snapshot sniper because I never got lucky when we used to play play trials anyway. But so like that was a gun that I really really wanted. And then Immortal was like so clearly better than any other option that it was like you have this compulsion. Like basically it's FOMO building up. It's like you have to go get this thing, because if you want to be able to like, you know, be competitive with other players, like if they have this thing and you don't have this thing, which it's like part of me I hate, because it's like I don't want to have that feeling. But also, I mean, if I'm honest about it, I guess it gets people to play the game in times where they probably wouldn't otherwise. And you know, as a developer, that's ultimately what they want, right? Is people putting as many hours into the game as possible. So it's tricky because then it causes all these problems. And, you know, we've seen, you know, people wanting Immortal to be nerfed a million times in the last, like, however many months it's been out. And it's, you know, continuously gotten like nerfed little by little, but it's like every time they introduce something that is desirable enough to get people to change their habits and actually go play the game to get it, and it's like, it's naturally probably going to be an outlier that needs to be like dealt with eventually too.
You know, it's funny thinking back to like looping back to the Final Shape discussion. If we compare like Witch Queen versus Lightfall, it's such an interesting comparison because, you know, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like Lightfall crushed it from like a numbers perspective out the gate. Even though so many people seemed less happy with Lightfall. Like when you put them side by side, it almost felt like the community sentiment was Witch Queen good, Lightfall bad. And yet the numbers showed Lightfall brought so many more people in. But the retention perspective is like Witch Queen was able to kind of hang on to the people back then a little bit longer than Lightfall. And so it almost makes you wonder with Final Shape, you know, coming back to your original question, what does Bungie need to focus on? I feel like they need to focus on those two models and figure out like, okay, what did we do good in Lightfall that just exploded the amount of people that came to the game? Obviously marketing, but then like, what is the core thing that seems to be keeping, let me reword that. What is the core thing that seems to keep people around? Is it truly just the storyline? Is that like truly critical enough to literally keep people playing 15 months, you know, 8 months, 15 months after Final Shape comes out? Or is it maybe a combination of that and, like we talked about before, core game mode changes, fundamental changes? Like, I personally don't know what people value the most. Like for me as a person, I value the activities over the storyline. But based on like the community response from Witch Queen, it really felt like people valued the storyline so much more than I ever kind of realized. So I hope Bungie figures that out, but curious what you guys think.
So for us, I mean, the story only really matters for like those first few days when we're actually playing through it. But if you think about it for like the average person who's in the community and maybe doesn't play on those first days, you know, like imagine Lightfall comes out, everyone who plays it on day one says this sucks. People aren't going to be coming in throughout the year as much as they would if the reviews were good. You know, like I think for Witch Queen, throughout the entire year, people were like, this is one of the best campaigns Bungie has ever made. And that just makes people so much more likely to pick up the game and go try out Witch Queen. But on the other hand, with Lightfall, the entire year, everyone's just saying, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. And you're not going to go play, you know, you're not going to go buy Lightfall and, you know, try to get into the game again if all the reviews just say it's absolute garbage. So I think from a retention standpoint, like, sure, you know, the activities matter, the story matters, but I think the quality of the campaign matters for the trickle of new and returning players that come throughout the year. And that's a substantial part of the overall player base.
You know, that's such a good perspective because it's fascinating to me on one hand that like the campaign, something that's played such a small percentage of an annual amount of hours put into the game, holds that much weight. But on the other hand, like I get it. You're totally right. 90% of reviews that I tend to see scrolling on my phone are about the campaign. And if that's sort of like the amplifier that goes out to all of the people who don't own the game, you're right. Like that is the number one goal. It's like, okay, if reviews are a result of campaign primarily over the rest of the game, then you got to make the campaign absolutely perfect so that new people try it and like you said, trickle in over time, I guess. Yeah.
It's weird because the campaign is probably not a very large percentage of our playtime, but I think it matters a lot for new people getting into the game because it's like, okay, what do you do when you first pick up the game, right? Like you do the intro story, like you do all the existing stories that weren't removed from the game, and then you go do, like the latest story, like you walk through all of the campaigns, and at that point, each campaign is like, 15 or 20% of your overall playtime. So like when you're relatively new, or if you're just really casual, the campaigns matter a ton. But I think it's a much different perspective for people like us, where our annual playtime might be like 1% the campaign because we just do it and then, probably don't come back to it. So
yeah, for sure.
It's a different perspective if you're a super casual player who only plays, a few times a year or something like that.
So you take games like Cyberpunk, for example, that had a really terrible launch. Like people were so excited about it, and then the press around the game was just awful, and it really turned off a lot of people from wanting to try it. But then over time, like, you start hearing, oh, they worked on it a whole lot, they made it a lot better, and it's like starting to like, oh, maybe it's worth trying out again. And so you see these like resurgences of these big games that kind of flopped initially, and they get a decent amount of interest back. Whereas like if you have a flop of a campaign like the Lightfall campaign, they don't really work on that more again, right? So it's like that's sort of like set in stone, and then it's like it doesn't really have that same opportunity for that like press cycle of like, oh, like this is kind of they worked on it, they made it better. And so I think like if you're a player and you're like super invested, like maybe that is a small percentage of your life as a someone who's a Destiny player, but if you're actually trying to get into the game as a newer player and like that's sort of the narrative you're hearing about the game still is like, oh, that was a terrible campaign, like not worth playing. It's like it does kind of take until that next like, big expansion cycle to like, oh, is it good now? Like did they do a good job on like the newest thing? So it's kind of interesting.
What are your guys' thoughts on like another thing that I think the game needs to be successful? Again, it's sort of twofold. It's like get new people in at the final shape, but then how do you keep people playing afterwards? For the first portion, a lot of people always talk about how the new player experience needs to be important, or the new player experience needs to be good. And I completely agree that has to be a huge focus. What do you guys think about the new player experience? Like right now, it's pretty important that someone gets in, like you guys said, they enjoy the campaign. But then after that, like it's still pretty confusing, I think, for new players on like, even where to begin. Like, okay, what should I purchase? What is available under these certain DLCs? What's going to actually matter relative to the final shape or afterwards? And then like, even once you buy the DLCs or decide to purchase something, I really hope, I don't know how to do it or how Bungie should do it, but like, how do you kind of tell people like, hey, here's sort of like the weapon meta? Not the meta per se, but like, here's some things you should go get. Like, what do you guys think if Bungie somehow was like, okay, we kind of know these are the hot archetypes or weapons that like new players should invest their time into. If there was some sort of guide, like you're going to want to get yourself a decent rocket launcher. Here's a journey or some options on like how you could get that. Like imagine as a new player, if that was like a quest or something like that. And it was like, okay, cool. Like it says I can get a pretty good one from this raid or from this dungeon or from this thing. Sweet. Like, let's go do that. And it just told them like, yep, you can get it from beating the boss in this dungeon. Or I don't know. Like that's where communities come in handy, but I don't know. Yeah. I've always struggled with that.
There were a few things kind of like that, like the quests for like you get the Night Watch Scout Rifle as like your first legendary, and it comes with like a good roll if you're a new player. So that's like it's kind of like a good weapon to get you started. And then there was also like the Taipan. So like there are some things that like are basically like the starter pack, if that makes sense. But the game doesn't present it like that, so people don't really know. I think the biggest problem with the new player experience is that it doesn't hold your hand whatsoever. So you really need an experienced player to guide you through, or you just need to watch like absurd amounts of YouTube videos and Google guides and stuff. So it's like I think the game just needs to explain itself a little bit better and be a little bit more like obvious when it comes to here's a tutorial on how to infuse your gear, because that's literally never explained at all. And that's just such a simple and yet important thing that everyone needs to know. So it needs to explain all of the systems that exist within the game. I got a comment on one of my videos. It said, I've been playing for 8 months and I don't have the artifact. And it's like, well, like, wow, and you know what? I don't blame them, because the game literally never tells you that you should get the artifact. So there's just so many things that are just unexplained, and it's just like, it's a complete mystery to new players. So it makes sense if you're a returning player, but if you're new, it's just like, it's baffling.
I'm astounded by how many comments I get on my. So I've made 2 new player guides in the last couple of years that have both done pretty well on YouTube, and one of the most common comments that I see is, "I watched this video. The game looks too confusing. I'm not gonna play it now,"
I quit.
Which is hilarious to me. I mean, it's sad. It's like hilarious, but also sad. And I think what's also interesting is that it takes a fairly motivated player to go watch a video about the game that they want to play. Like, most players are just going to try the game and like, see if they like it before they go through the effort of like watching content about the game. Like, some people will do that, but not everyone. And so, like you're saying, if in the game itself there's not enough hand holding to like kind of guide you along through such a complicated game, like they're really shooting themselves in the foot by not having that be a more straightforward experience for people.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, like how do certain games do it, and you how do certain games keep their community going and keep their player count going, and like some of those games, I think you mentioned CS:GO, maybe Fortnite, or League of Legends. Like, some of those games, if you break it down, they're actually not that complicated. Like the reality is, you get in and you point and shoot, okay, there's items you got to learn about. There's like powers you got to learn about, but you can kind of just hop in and start. And I think it is just the simplicity of them. And Destiny is extremely complicated. It is overwhelming when you have like 18 quests on the go at once, and you're like, God, I don't know which one is more important than the other, or which one should happen before or after this other one, or maybe that doesn't matter, but the fact that I don't know is frustrating. So yeah, I don't know how they solve that with Final Shape, other than figuring out how to get new players caught up easier without getting confused. And then there's like the whole second half, like, how do you get them invested? I think, like, for the future after Final Shape, I think if you get the new players to feel like they had a great new player experience in Final Shape, they can help carry a lot of the player count, into the future years. Like, if veterans leave, hey, that's okay. If they want to leave, that they have every right to do that. Hopefully you find ways to keep them, and that's why I think you need to know, or you need to tell your community what's coming up. But yeah, it does seem like you're just going to need new players.
Yep. I have a question for you guys. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. So I have sort of a belief that the game is healthiest when PvP players are incentivized to play PvE and PvE players are incentivized to play PvP. That basically both sides feed each other. And maybe that's like something that I think PvE players in particular don't necessarily like that. But when I think of like the history of the game, it seems like those are the times when you got the most people like really engaged in the game. Like you'd get, for example, people want Recluse or Mountaintop for PvE, and so you get people to play both parts of the game. And I would love to continue to see them like not have the game be so divided, but like incentivize people to play all parts of the game. Because I mean, PvP players will go through and do like dungeons endlessly to get like a Matador or whatever. It's like I think that just it helps people just become more invested in the game overall.
I think population wise, that era was unquestionably the most healthy that PvP has ever been. And I think if you put good PvE loot in the Crucible, like there's inevitably going to be some complaining, but it definitely does make the game healthier as a whole. So I don't know. I think, there's certainly some upsides and some downsides, but I think it is good when there is some mixing of loot between, both sides of the game. Also, just in general, I think historically PvP has just had very, very, very lackluster loot compared to PvE. If I think back in the decade-long history of this game, I'd say like 95% of good loot is not in the Crucible. So I think, those pinnacles really were an exception where it was like, wow, there's actually some incredible loot that you can get in the Crucible. And that really ushered in this new era of excitement around PvP. So I would love to see, just more exciting loot actually exist in the Crucible. And I'm not saying we need pinnacles again, but they did actually do quite a bit of good for the overall game. So
I've always been torn by the concept. Like as someone who used to be PvP only, I used to always make the argument that like, let me play the game how I want. So let me be able to get the loot that I want, how I want. Therefore, no, not therefore, but for an example, weapon X that's in PvE, why can't I get that same weapon playing PvP? But I do think you're right. Like when you have that like cross pollination where you kind of force some PvP players to try and learn PvE and then force some PvE players to try out PvP, you ultimately add total player base count to both lobbies, if you will, or both activities, which is good for the game. So sometimes I wonder, like, what if loot was available in both sources? Like, kind of what I was saying at the beginning, but like maybe it's just like a higher drop rate in one versus the other, so you sort of have the option. That would sort of divide the people, because then if it's available in both, there'd never be that motivation to go to the other side. But yeah, I don't know if it was like the Igneous had an extremely high drop rate in PvP, but a really low drop rate in PvE. It'd be more accessible to everybody, but there'd still be like that motivation to try and, okay, I can't seem to get it from the low drop rate in my PvE side. Let me try it in PvP.
The thing I find interesting is that I feel like one of the things that makes a lot of PvE focused players not enjoy PvP is that PvP feels like this like super intense, sweaty thing. And I think part of that is because there's not many systems that incentivize PvE players to play it. And so like the average population of PvP is pretty tough and sweaty, but I don't think it has to be that way. Like there's so many other games over the history of, gaming that have had like Halo, for example, there's a lot of people just played PvP for fun, and it was not like, there was of course like the crazy MLG, like competitive side of it. But like, I just remember having like LAN parties with friends where we would just, set up crazy party games, and the guy who was dropping 0 kills but like was having fun trolling their teammates was having just as much fun as the person who was getting like the crazy like kill streaks and stuff. And I would like to see them figure out how they can incentivize more people to play PvP and just have fun with it, and and get rewarded for their time in there as well. Because I feel like right now, if you're a PvE only player, it's like, of course it's not fun to go into PvP if you get stomped every time. There's no loot for it. It's like, and you feel bad about it because the people who are in there are like, teabagging or whatever. It's just like, I don't know. I can understand why people wouldn't want to participate very much, but I also feel like it doesn't have to be that way.
This is a little tangential, but I think there's also like a really weird like trend where PvE players just resign themselves to always being bad at the Crucible. And I think that doesn't have to be the case. Like I saw this Reddit post the other day, and this guy's like, well, I'm in my 30s and therefore I will never go flawless. And I'm like, if you could really go flawless if you just, put in some practice and put in some hours and learned how to be a PvP player. Like, I don't know. I think people just like, they just give up before they even start. And in that regard, I don't know. I feel like there's just this trend of people just not wanting to be PvP players in general, which is, I find kind of strange.
Yeah, I wonder. I've always, for me, I've never needed loot to incentivize myself. I just enjoy improving at any activity that I try. But I do wonder, like, for people who don't really share that same self motivation, like where improvement is the only thing necessary. If loot helps get more people to try, then maybe they learn to actually be driven, by that self improvement type thing. So maybe, like, what if comp, for example, right now I think there's skill based matchmaking in it. So it's like, it's kind of a weird thing, right? Where someone who's low skilled can get up to 10,000 in comp without ever actually facing the most skilled players in the game, because like their skill based matchmaking keeps them in a different bracket on their way to 10,000. But what if, like, if that game mode, for example, was truly just rank based, and they just had unbelievable loot all the way up to the 10,000. Not at the 10,000. Sure, you can have something there, but like, what if they just had incredible loot for the climb? Then maybe the lesser skilled people would be like, well, whatever. Even if I don't make it, I'll get some incredible loot along the way. So that could help, I guess. But yeah.
I think that's a great conversation to have in this community, because the philosophy the last several years has been, if everyone can't get it, it should not exist. And I really personally do not agree with that. I think it's okay to have some stuff that's good and hard to get. Like, for example, if you did have those pieces of loot along the competitive ladder all the way up to the max rank, there would be some complaints of, like those people I mentioned earlier who just refuse to play PvP and refuse to think that they can improve. They're just like, oh, okay, well, that sucks. I can't ever get this. But I think the reality is that, like many players, if they put in the time and effort, they can get these things. And it's great to have an incentive to actually improve, like you mentioned. So right. Personally, I would be all for having good rewards along the ladder and making it an actual rank-based system. I think that would very much revitalize the comp playlist in a way that the quote-unquote comp revamp didn't actually do.
That also makes me think about the whole vendor resets too, like core game modes. So Gambit, Crucible, and Strikes. Like, what if I don't know about you guys, but I don't really care about the loot that's coming from those rank resets. Like, sure, yeah. I go pick them up if I even remember to. Sometimes I'm like maxed out on Crucible for so long. I'm like, oh, whoops, forgot to go collect my loot so that it could then, reset and I could get more loot. It's really cool. Like, once you start resetting it, you start getting extra perks in that, third and fourth column. Like, that's pretty sweet. But what if they just like amped that up even more? Thinking back to your original question, how do you get people to stay? What if in the final shape and in episodes, they're like, guess what? Core game modes, not only have we come up with new ones, that are hopefully fundamentally different, but in these new ones, you actually get showered with loot along the way. And so like a rank reset isn't just getting an extra perk in a column, maybe, because there's still some RNG tied to that. But what if it was like, no, legit, like you're going to get showered with loot from rank 0 to 16 or whatever it is before you reset over and over and over. I don't know, maybe that alone would be enough to keep people.
Well, what's funny, back in Destiny 1, you would log on each week to go to each vendor and see what the roles that they were selling were, which is like, I don't know, like exactly, I guess Lazur sort of still has that, but it's funny to me that, like that, Banshee as well now, but it's just like, I feel like that was a cool part of like each part of the game have that effect. So, I mean, I think the more they can add that type of a thing is helpful. But I agree. I feel like just having that incentive to play the core playlist is so important. And I mean, PvP specifically, I feel like the loot from, like, do you remember back in Destiny 1, you would play PvP and you'd get like IS Lunas every once in a while. And those were like, that was like the best hand cannon, or, you know, arguably the best hand cannon for like that era. And so, you know, just by playing it, you always had a chance that you were going to get that like god roll. It's like every game, even if you were the bottom, and if there's even a meme, like the people who are at the bottom would often get like the Galahorn drop or whatever. So, but it's like, I don't know. I just feel like, and even like, I don't know, I liked it back when you could see what other people got too. I thought that was like an interesting, like, social thing. You cared more at the end of the game, like who got certain rewards and stuff. And it's like, it feels so isolated now. Where it's like, okay, I got, you know, my 1 millionth, like, you know, Crucible SMG that I, you know, have already
out of bounds.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I feel like that's a big area for improvement that would just it would just be simple tweaks that would help people feel like, you know, their time is more valuable. Well, and like you said a minute ago too, the ultimate goal, I think, in all of that is just to get people to play, and then hopefully it's a reason for them to give it a chance. And then hopefully along the way they discover, oh, it's actually fun to play PvP and I like getting a little bit better. And then they build the habit of like, oh, this is actually fun to try to get better at the game. But, you know, it's like maybe it's incentivized initially by like, is a good way to build out your account and get better loot.
You know what else would be cool? That you really made me think about that old end game screen where you could see people, like you could see what people got. Back to the Igneous, like, okay, you have a guaranteed method of getting it, but it would be kind of neat, I think. I'm curious what other people and what you guys think, but like, it would be kind of neat if there was this hyper small chance that you could get it from like an end game drop. And of course, like, you're going to have AFK farmers. That's unfortunate. You know, people suck. But for the other 99.9% or 99.9% of people playing this game, I don't know, that'd be kind of cool if all of a sudden a God Roll Igneous dropped from a random Crucible match. Like, it was super low chance, but that's how I felt with Ice Luna for so long. I played so much PvP just in case, because I would see other people get it. I'd be like, oh my God, maybe I'll get it next match.
Yep.
Can we also say why did Palindrome and Aya's Luna come back as non-related to the Crucible? You know, it's like,
yeah, so strange. Yeah.
That was just an era of like, good loot is not allowed to come from PvP.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Final Shape. I think in particular, again, the story I think is something we didn't talk about a whole lot in this, but I feel like the better job they do at the story will naturally impact the entire health of the game post Final Shape. That's like a thing that will continue to draw new players in. But I guess for me personally, I would like to see them really invest in systems that make you want to log in and play every week. And for me, a big part of it is really just continuing to improve the health of PvP, because that's something that even if there's not a whole lot of new dungeons and raids and things to do, like, I still just enjoy logging in on a regular basis as long as the Crucible's in a healthy place. We didn't really touch on it, but another big part of that for me is always like the health of the server infrastructure and networking and stuff like that. So don't need to go into that rabbit hole, but that's something that I would like to see them, continue to improve upon as well.
Yeah, I think with the story coming to a conclusion, I mean, this has to be the moment. You know, we've been building to this for so long. Final Shape has to bring things to a satisfying conclusion. But the other question is, how will it lead us beyond? How will it transition us out of this saga and into whatever is next? And I think that's still a really big unanswered question that we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, it's a big moment for this franchise one way or the other.
Yeah, I completely agree. TV shows are incredible at giving you this wholesome conclusion feeling with a cliffhanger, right? Like, that makes you want to wait for the next season, but you still feel good about concluding that, whatever 10 episode season you just watched. I feel like they need to do the same thing here. They need everyone to feel really good about closing the one saga, but some sort of opening or cliffhanger on, like, oh my God, for the storyline, on reasons to keep playing in the episodes.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. This will be interesting to see what they do.